Out of all of Ubisoft's franchises, some are discussed more than others. Spirited debates about Assassin's Creed or Far Cry are plentiful, but you're not likely to hear nearly as much about Watch Dogs. When mentioned, what might come to mind is the first game's bombastic marketing campaign several years ago, and the subsequent disappointment of its release. To call it a failure is inaccurate. 10 million copies sold in a year is quite lavish for a new IP in the hyper-competitive AAA market, and it spawned 2 sequels in the years since its release, which enjoyed similar financial success.
This had better be fucking good.
For these videos, we'll be touring each entry of the series, and uncover why the series' reputation has suffered while its gameplay has evolved. We will start with our complicated relationship with the first game.
That is a terrible plan. I love it.
It's the summer of 2012, and a new intellectual property from game developer and publishing company Ubisoft is soon to be revealed to the public. By the early 2010s, they had spent the previous console generation carving out a respectable market share with new IPs that became long-running super franchises in their own right.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
With the properly numbered and long-anticipated AC3 due for release in the fall of 2012. In Watch Dogs, a company called Bloom develops a Central Operating System, or CTOS, through which every single electronically operated device in city limits would be connected, monitored, and ultimately controlled. The first major city to adopt CTOS is Chicago, Illinois. But what happens when one person gains access and hence control over this system for their own goals? Well, shame how that turned out.
No way!
The anticipation of the first game was arguably the height of the Watch Dogs franchise's cultural relevance. It was one of the many trains that left the hype station after E3 2012, and it took no time at all for the dazzling Watch Dogs to build up an impressive head of steam.
Remember, connection is power, but be careful what you do with it. Have a great teacher and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Watch Dogs was delayed until about half a year after the launch of the 8th generation of consoles, citing an unwillingness to compromise on quality, which is, ironic, given Ubisoft's reputation in following years, and the often messy state of popular game launches today. As for the game's marketing, well, I didn't know just how bombastic it was until I started researching this video. The 2012 demo was filled with QR codes, which was clearly the future of hyperlinks, and each one would take you to .connexion, which is cooler because there's an X in it, or just more British. This was also during the dark ages that were the height of prank and social experiment video popularity on YouTube, and naturally Ubisoft had to get in on that juicy trend. This promo replicated mechanics we saw in the game demos, like hacking ATMs, tripping car alarms, bursting streetlights, and culminating in a pile-up that got the police involved, asking the totally real actual human people questions. Don't worry. It's just a prank, bro. Things got a little bit less laughable when Ubisoft mailed an Australian publication called the 9MSN a black safe and an ominous note, telling the reporter to whom it was addressed to check their voicemail. Said voicemail went unchecked, since the news outlet was chiefly concerned about the beeping noise that came from the safe, and a bomb squad was called in to reveal a dud, specifically a review copy of Watch Dogs. No one working at 9MSN had ever published or even written a game review at the time. When the game at last launched in May of 2014, people quickly realized that the future of gaming wasn't what they were led to believe it would be, and Ubisoft started one of its worst years ever in terms of public perception of their brand. Criticisms included graphics downgrades, a simplified features list, bugs, a spectacularly bland narrative, and all packaged as another GTA clone but with Ubisoft towers and forgotten side content. For many, this is where the conversation ended, and you'll still hear these criticisms to this day. But despite all this, sales were healthy, and the Metacritic average was around 80%, at least among publications who weren't under bomb threat. I myself reviewed it positively for my high school newspaper, back when I didn't know how to criticize anything I enjoyed, and still knew how to feel hope. This game was really let down by its own marketing, a worrying trend that continues to this very day with other super hyped games that overpromise and underdeliver. On an almost annual basis, there's at least one anticipated game that drops the ball, and 2014 was filled with them.
What is a man? But a miserable pile of secrets.
The sin of Watch Dogs was simply failing to capitalize on the perception of the game it claimed to be. What players wanted and were ostensibly promised was a chillingly cautionary tale about just how much of our lives is controlled by tech. What we got instead was a shockingly unambitious revenge-flavored action movie, starring a protagonist many players didn't have enough context to connect with, and his Punisher-esque crusade against Chicago's criminal element. Oh, and he has a magic smartphone, I guess.
Anything you need?
My phone?
Jesus, you have a problem. You need to unplug.
A cornerstone of what this missed potential story looks like is protagonist Aiden Pierce, aka the Fox, aka the Vigilante. He could be a rather compelling character, but he's trapped in a story drastically less interesting than he is.
How did that happen?
In short, he's a scarred psychopath, willing to do anything to reach his goals, and given far too much power to do so.
The fuck is wrong with you?
I wouldn't know where to begin.
His personality seems subdued, but his word choices often reveal a more cynical, radical perspective.
Pawnee, soda pop and apple pie. Yeah, but this small town charm is bullshit. Most of it's refugees from the city. Still hiding from something.
He's a Batman-flavored crazy, absolutely unwavering in purpose, and in conversation even with allies, he applies subtle but forceful ways of dominating the people around him. I could go on, but you should probably just check out the channel Prisma for his hour-plus psychoanalysis of Pierce that can show you how unfairly dismissed this nuanced character really is. I'm probably making this sound more interesting than you might remember, and that's because the actual plotline of Watch Dogs is far less compelling than its premise. A straightforward revenge tale with themes of lapsing tech ethics and hacking used more as window dressing than anything else. The intro to the game is a gut wound to the entire storyline, because it trades contextual clarity for efficient presentation. It rushes through a botched heist that leaves Pierce's niece Lena dead. It then fast-forwards an entire year, presumably the year where Pierce develops the most as a character. We still haven't gotten a chance to control him directly, and he's already changed from a modern thief into a ruthless, violent tech wizard vigilante.
Why should I trust you? Because I could shoot you and take it.
And the first thing he does before he's even under our control is capture Maurice, the man indirectly responsible for Lena's death. Fade to black, roll credits, right? Seems to me like we're practically already done here. In our videos on Ghost of Tsushima, you can get an idea of how much an opportunity was missed by Watch Dogs not focusing its narrative structure on the gradual evolution of a relatable hero into a pragmatic justice machine. If the main story has little to do with Aiden as a character, then surely it's about the creation and impact of CTOS. Not in the slightest.
And don't call me Shirley.
It revolves around Aiden once again trying to protect his family from the consequences of his actions at the Merlot Hotel, leading him on a hunt that tours the various Bloom connections to the Chicago underworld. A majority of the game is spent trying to get into one well-fortified building, where a gang leader sits on the largest pile of digital blackmail in Chicago. Aiden eventually just goes in and shoots everyone to grab the data himself. Then the data is stolen, unstolen, and the whole song and dance repeats, but now with the Chicago Mafia. The finale is a blur of murders and suicide, and Aiden lives very grumpily ever after.
Some days I should just listen to the voice in my head that says, stay in bed.
Some days, yeah.
This is a very aggressive glossing over of the plot, but the point here is to juxtapose it with the overall premise of the franchise, a cyber dystopia with one hacker able to stand up to the powers that be. The story does make the occasional gesture towards its supposed themes, but it undercuts them just as often.
I've got her medical records. She had an abortion last year. That might explain the therapist she's seeing.
Why are we prying this deep? I don't need a history, Clara. I need a location.
As Aiden digs deeper into CTOS, he realizes, seemingly for the first time, the extent to which Bloom invades people's lives.
Profiler system's online. Everybody's nasty little secrets at the click of a button.
This seems like something he should have realized during the year we skipped, when he learned to use it for himself. Whenever raised, this point is often immediately dropped as the story snaps back to focus on hunting down Maurice's contractor.
There's a computer inside that.
No, it's okay. I really don't care. I was just trying to make some small talk.
In fact, there are collectible privacy invasion side activities where you watch strangers' weird little habits and other assorted events to raise your completion score. Throughout the series, you can grab private info and even money off of people's phones by the dozen on the street. That's not to say that a personally driven revenge story is incompatible with the themes people expect from Watch Dogs, but why not make Bloom more directly responsible for Lena's fate? Come for the niece revenge, stay for the cyber revolution. So if the story doesn't have much to do with CTOS, what about the gameplay? As I mentioned, you do way more shooting than hacking, whether you want to or not. What you don't hear about as often is how fun that shooting can actually be. The combat has more in common with Ghost Recon, Splinter Cell, and maybe even a bit of Max Payne. Sometimes you can detonate a steam pipe or turn off the lights, but you're much more likely to slide over cover, blast some schmuck through the teeth, throw a grenade at a clustered group, activate your Time Wizard drug powers, and shoot said grenade before it even hits the ground. Then don't look at the explosion as you gun-foo whoever was dumb enough to try and get close. This is objectively awesome, but wasn't this supposed to be the Hackerman Simulator 2014? The most interesting, rare hack you actually get to use is the ability to cause a small blackout, which really just prevents any further hacking and gives your shooting some mood lighting. There are some more interesting hacking combinations you can work out, but when you have so much ammo combined with even more violent abilities, past a certain point, why bother? It all comes back to promises and delivery. If Watch Dogs was advertised as an action game about revenge set in a uniquely dynamic world, we might be telling a different story now. But regardless of how financially successful it was, it became a perceived failure in the eyes of the post-hype culture born of the many thermonuclear-level controversies Ubisoft experienced in 2014 alone. It's almost irreversibly doomed to be remembered as an overhyped and underwhelming execution of an interesting idea, arguably a black mark that its successors have been too hastily branded with as well.
And it really irritates the shit out of me sometimes.
Marketing showed us a game that didn't and couldn't exist at the time, and the game they sold us has paid the price for falling short of the expectations created for it. Since then, it's fallen into a strange kind of cultural limbo. However, there's an important soul behind these disappointments, like a maturely envisioned protagonist struggling to balance his will to right the wrongs he's been dealt against his deeply frightening personal flaws.
Look at you! You plowed over people to get to a mob boss. You think you're absolved because your cause is what? Noble?
And the way he reflects what has become of the world he lives in. In Watch Dogs, there's the strong foundation for ambitious concepts in open-world games, like a well-simulated city with dynamic denizens full of ways to interact with people and objects around the player. This game didn't leave the mark it should have. Some might say it was more like a stain, but spare a thought for what it is at its best, and I think you'll understand why we feel that this franchise, first entry included, is important. When this series returns, you should grab some sunglasses, because we're headed to San Francisco to hack the planet in Watch Dogs 2. See you then.